Okie. First of all, I apologize. I have been talking on stream to absolutely no one for the last 5 minutes. I forgot to hit the go live button. Welcome to Ticker Symbol Live. My name is Alex, and this channel is all about taking a look at the future vision of ARK Invest and mapping that onto the stocks that they are buying today. I'm a little red in the face because I have been talking about Virgin Galactic to myself for the last 5 minutes. So, I'd like to spend some time today talking about Virgin Galactic, one of the most exciting stocks, one of my favorite stocks, enough that I'm willing to talk about it to myself for minutes before realizing that nobody else can hear me. And of course, then we're going to talk about the future of this channel. Surprise, surprise, one of the reasons I probably forgot to hit the live button is because this is actually one of the last episodes of Ticker Symbol Live. And I'll explain why a little later on in the video. It's all good news. And it's all about doubling down on ticker symbol U, the channel that invests in you. So first of all, let me give you the first clue by going over to the ARK Reactor. The ARK Reactor is a tool I built initially for myself to take a look at ARK Invest's trading each and every day. I have it ordered by the percent change in share count for all of their positions from the most recent trading days. And here's what's been going on. 3D Systems, ticker symbol DDD, has gone up in price. We've covered it. Jaws Spitfire, which is Velo 3D, another 3D printing company focused on metal 3D printing, went up 20%. We've covered it. Virgin Galactic, ticker symbol SPCE, and one of my personal favorite stocks, is in third place. I've covered it briefly on my main channel. It focuses on orbital aerospace, space exploration and tourism, as well as hypersonic point-to-point travel. So we'll cover it today. Peloton, Open Door, Nano Dimensions, 10x Genomics, we're starting to get to the point where we're covering a lot of ARK Invest's biggest buys and sells each day, and then we've done a good job already covering them. So instead of rushing through all 250 of their stocks, or however many they hold in total now across their 6 actively managed ETFs, what I'm going to start doing is making more refined videos on ticker symbol U, talking about the vision of each stock and how it plays a role in this much bigger puzzle. So as we wrap up big ideas on the main channel, the next thing I'd like to introduce is something like stocks in 7 minutes or tech in 12, or, we're going to move more and more into individual platforms of disruptive innovation and technology, as well as the companies behind them and how they're impacting our future. So we're getting more and more narrow focused on ticker symbol U, and as a result, it's going to overlap more and more with ticker symbol Live, right? So let me give you a brief overview of space exploration through the eyes of Virgin Galactic now. Still a little flustered from getting about halfway through this and then having to rewind because I wasn't live. Okay, so what we're looking at is ARK Invest's Big Ideas Report. And we're on big idea number 11, Orbital Aerospace, a video that I have not yet made on ticker symbol U, right? The special thing about Orbital Aerospace is it's the closest big idea to my direct background. I used to be a rocket scientist at MIT. I used to focus on optics and radar, meaning I worked on telescopes and radio telescopes that looked up into the stars. And they supported 2 things. The first thing was missile tests from the military. They would run, test missiles, obviously with no sort of payload of any kind. And we would watch them in the sky and look how they performed. And then the second thing I did was I supported NASA test flights. So rockets launching from near me up into space with special instruments to do things like measure certain things about the atmosphere. And both of those things were really cool, and they taught me a lot about rocket science, orbital aerospace, what's going on in space in low Earth, middle Earth, and high Earth orbit and beyond. And so this area is very near and dear to my heart. Here's how ARK Invest thinks about it. And I'll answer questions about Black Sky as well. I know there's a lot of cool optical imagery, looking down on Earth type stuff going on with that company. We can talk about that briefly towards the end. Orbital Aerospace is taking off and is made up of really 3 segments. So here's a little bit about the technologies that are involved in it. Advancements in deep learning, mobile connectivity, sensors, 3D printing, and robotics have all been ballooning for decades and are beginning to decline, right? The costs associated with them are beginning to decline. And this is important because all of these technologies are converging. And one of the biggest areas of convergence is orbital aerospace. As a result, the number of satellite launches and rocket landings is proliferating, meaning they're getting cheap enough that more and more businesses are getting access to that kind of capability, launching stuff into space. According to ARK's research, orbital aerospace, including satellite connectivity and hypersonic flight, will exceed $370 billion annually. That's $0.37 trillion, right? And it makes up satellite connectivity and hypersonic flight. So whenever I get a question like, why is it Netflix in ARKX? Here is your answer. Because when people get connected to the internet, the first thing they will subscribe to is probably Amazon Prime, let's be real. But the second thing is probably Netflix, right? So Netflix is a big beneficiary of satellite connectivity, more internet covering more of the world. I actually don't remember what I think it's HEO, right? High Earth orbit. So there's low Earth, high Earth, and geostationary and all that. I did watch Lord of the Rings last night, so that could have been what snuck in there. Middle Earth orbit. I'm sticking to it. Cool. So ARK Invest is breaking down that big idea into 3 steps. Global connectivity, which is not the focus of today. Hypersonic point-to-point travel, which is the focus of today. And multiplanetary species, which is the thesis of ticker symbol U, that all of this is part of some much greater puzzle. The markets are slowly driving us to be a multiplanetary species. And all of these advancements in technology that we're seeing converge here on Earth will be largely responsible for enabling us to live on the moon, on Mars, and hopefully beyond, right? And that is sadly not the topic of today's video either. So let's talk about the economics behind hypersonic point-to-point travel. Scroll all the way down past all of these amazing slides, and we land on the expectation of hypersonic flight to skyrocket in the future. According to ARK Invest research, passengers on short-haul flights are willing to pay $15,000 for every 2 hours saved on private planes. So think about a 12-hour flight or a 15-hour flight around the world. Again, New York City to Tokyo kind of being that quintessential example. And that, companies are willing to pay for their executives to get there much faster, right? Because productivity drops dramatically when you're on a plane. We know that people spend most of their time on planes trying to sleep, trying to watch Netflix, trying to do anything but work, because it turns out that when you're in a cramped, tiny seat with not a lot of space, it's very tough to be productive at your job. Based on the economics of short-haul flights, ARK estimates that passengers in business will be willing to pay $100,000, 6 figures, to save 13 hours on a 2 to 3 hour private hypersonic flight from New York City to Japan. And here's the important part of this. You can't take that flight today. That doesn't exist. So nobody's willing to pay for it, right? Because it's an imaginary thing. But when you take a 14-hour flight to Tokyo and the dude next to you is like, oh yeah, I'm making this trip on the way back in 3 hours because my company paid for it. That executive is going to go to his company and be like, why aren't we paying for this? This is now an option, right? So don't forget, one of the reasons nobody is paying for this is simply because you can't. And as soon as somebody brags about getting there in 3 hours, a lot more people are going to pay for it, right? So if 2.7 million passengers were to pay $100,000 for long-haul hypersonic flights, the market would scale to $270 billion in revenues annually. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. So let me zoom in here a little bit. So 4.5 billion passengers flew in 2018. Of course, that number is way down for 2020 as less and less people take flights. If 15% of those were over 7 hours, so that's 680 million people, right? 0.4% of those flew private. So very small amount, right? That's 2.7 million people though, right? So that's the total addressable market of hypersonic point-to-point travel. And we got to remember how we're talking about that population. It's the number of people who are already taking long-haul flights today that are able or willing to fly private on those flights, right? So if you charge $100,000 for all of those flights, so everyone who flies private is willing to switch to long-haul, hypersonic, point-to-point travel to fly privately to make this trip, that's the $270 billion total addressable market, right? What conversion rate of those people they get is a different story. Is it 50%, 20%, 100%? But that 270 is now the number you're chopping down when you say, yeah, about half of the people will switch, all of the people will switch, 20%, 5%, whatever. And by the way, 10% of this number is still a $27 billion market annually. So pretty big. This comment right here is exactly what we're going to talk about next. JE says, my concern about space, the stock, SPCE, surviving to get to hypersonic flight after SpaceX beats them to space tourism. So I'll break this down into like two different parts, but this is exact. I love this comment because it helps me transition to my view on SPCE, and we can talk about that here as well. I don't think that SpaceX and Virgin Galactic are going to compete very much. You know, Virgin Galactic is designed to take one or two, a few people into space for a short amount of time, give them that weightless experience, bring them back down to Earth, and they have a very resort-like experience on the ground as well surrounding that launch. Then they're focused on hypersonic point-to-point travel, that New York to Tokyo flight, and they have a very different business model than SpaceX. SpaceX, I think, is really focused on colonization, heavy lift. You know, all of their things are like, you can even just tell by the launch vehicles that they're very, very different, right? I'm a big SpaceX fan. I'm always sad that you can't go buy SpaceX stock. And I will tell you that during the recent market rally, I dropped. So let's take a look at the stock price here. So here's the stock history of SPCE. It was a SPAC. It launched in 2019. It had a rally and then a drop and then a sideways action and then a massive rally in early February. I dropped about 80% of my position during this massive rally. I averaged out on the way up because, as everyone in the comments here are quickly pointing out, surviving long-term, very technically advanced, far future, the words we're all kind of saying is the opportunity cost of investing in space SPCE today is high, right? A dollar might be performing better in the short term somewhere else than in Virgin Galactic stock because it has such a long-term vision of the future. That's what you're implicitly saying when you're worried about its survival, worried about its timeline for the next couple of years, test flight by test flight worries. You know, is it competing in space exploration, which is at least, kind of a decade or two away in terms of being a real meaningful total addressable market and all that kind of stuff. What you're actually saying as an investor, and this again is not financial advice, all of this is for entertainment purposes only, but what you're saying as an investor is maybe my dollar can better be used elsewhere in the short term, right? Comments like this, 100 bagger or bust, are absolutely correct. And then the next question you should ask yourself is, how long is it going to take to be 100 bagger? Could I buy more stock of it tomorrow if I was invested in something else that went up today, sold it, and bought more shares of SPCE when I think it's going to be in prime time? That's the kind of questions you need to be able to ask yourself as an investor, in my amateur investor opinion. And the reason to do that, the reason it's hard to do that, is because we're all emotionally invested at least a little bit, right? Ticker symbol SPCE, Virgin Galactic, is super exciting. It's easy to get emotionally invested in a stock that promises the future of space exploration. Let's talk about the specifics of that future now. I'll show you what makes me bullish in the long term, as well as lukewarm on the stock in the short term. We'll talk a little bit about Chamath buying and selling it out of some of his position in SPCE. And then we'll wrap up with the future of space exploration and the future of ticker symbol live. So we're looking at Virgin Galactic's fourth quarter and full year 2020 investor update. This was released, at the end of February. So very recent presentation, and the CEO is the one who gave the presentation. So here is what they achieved in 2020. And right away, I hope you follow me through the language, and then we'll talk about, whether these are stellar achievements, no pun intended, or whether they are a little lukewarm for our likings as investors. And remember, it's okay to be excited about something as an individual while being lukewarm on it as a financially invested investor, right? You can hold two independent thoughts in your head about the same company from two different positions, right? So they transitioned their spaceflight operations to New Mexico. They conducted 2 successful glide flights. They cleared 7 additional FAA verification reports. They have only 2 remaining. That's super important because FAA verification, their whole success hinges on being FAA approved for all of these space flights. They demonstrated commercial demand with the One Small Step program, which closed with approximately 1,000 participants. The future astronaut community remained at approximately 600, so that's not going down, which is great because, as we'll see, one of the total addressable markets that Virgin Galactic is helping with is astronaut training in microgravity, which is very, very important, but very, very niche. You can imagine if 60 astronauts dropped off the program, that's a 10% hit to that total addressable market. Strengthened balance sheet with successful fundraise, right? So conducted 1 test flight on December 12th, continued to make progress on our fleet expansion, and then realigned the company's functional structure under the Virgin Galactic brand in preparation for growth. So lots of realignments, lots of paperwork, lots of things going on. Conducted 1 test flight, which we'll see, in my opinion, any test flight that everyone is safe and there are lessons learned and nothing explodes is a successful test flight to me. That's obviously not the criteria we're looking for as aggressive investors. But just a caveat here, as somebody who is involved in the test flight and science community, anytime anyone walks away unharmed and the vehicle lands safely, all the instruments are in check, and they just made some call mid-flight to say, hey, we're not ready for this, we're coming back down, is a successful test flight, right? So I think we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Here is their test program update, right? So rocket-powered space flight with 2 pilots on board will be the first flight. The aim is to complete data for final 2 FAA verification reports, the 2 that they have left that we just found, and then the revenue-generating payloads under the NASA Flight Opportunities Program will be aboard these flights to be tested, right? The second flight will be another rocket-powered space flight, full cabin of mission specialists and 2 pilots on board. So this is the big one, Flight 2. There are going to be mission specialists on board, and it's going to be a lot of people, so they need to make sure everything is safe and secure before they do this flight. And that pathway is as long as it needs to be because there's nothing more important than a safe, reliable flight every time, right? And then finally, the third flight, rocket-powered space flight, Sir Richard Branson's first space flight. That's the one we're all looking forward to because that's the big PR space flight. And then demonstrating private astronaut experience, right? And that's obviously the one that will lead to helping astronauts train in microgravity. So the first test flight, December 12th, the flight was delivering earnings and success despite not reaching space. And that's what I was kind of alluding to before. That's totally great, right? We love to see that because no matter what happens, everything went fine. They just didn't get to the altitude maybe they were hoping to, right? Demonstrated strong safety-first culture and safety on the spaceflight system. Great. Identified EMI, electromagnetic interference, as the root cause of the rocket motor controller reboot, and then implemented according corrective actions. Fantastic. And then in February, uncovered additional electromagnetic interference impacts during pre-flight preparations for the February 13th flight, and then analysis and corrective work underway with plans to complete this test flight in May instead of February. So this is, I think, where a lot of the worries come from. Space test flight and test flights in general have a lot of inherent technical risks. They're not risks you can math away. They're risks that not only look bad, obviously, on camera, but actually are bad because human lives are at stake, billions of dollars of equipment and research are at stake, right? So you want to take as long as you need to get them right the first time. And that's where I think that elongated timeline to the future, we're going to keep seeing this happen with Virgin Galactic. And that doesn't make it a bad company at all. That makes it a company with the right mentality where solving this incredibly hard problem, technical hard problem, takes as long as it takes. Hypersonic point-to-point travel, getting someone from point A to point B in 3 hours instead of 12 is a miracle, right? It's a technical marvel. Getting somebody into space, letting them hang out in microgravity and bringing them safely back down to Earth reliably more than once a day. They're aiming, we'll see that in a minute, they're aiming for more than one flight a day, 400 a year or something, right? That's a technical miracle. They're working on a technical miracle. So they're going to take as long as they have to, right? And you're seeing the start of that here is why I'm bringing that up. Because, you know, when something goes wrong with an instrument, they're taking the corrective action. And then you see that their test flights get pushed back by months, an entire fiscal quarter from February to May, right? So they talk a little bit about their markets. Their spaceflight system is built to serve three markets: private astronauts, right? That's the space tourists; microgravity research, human-tended and payload only; and professional astronaut training. So NASA's astronauts or SpaceX's astronauts or what have you, right? So private astronauts are the people that are the space tourists. Professional astronauts are the certified, working on behalf of the nations, the government, being paid astronauts in space. And they announced the confirmation of an Italian Air Force flight, demonstrating their capabilities for both human-tended research and suborbital astronaut training. Again, incredibly technically challenging things to be talking about. And their spaceship is coming soon, and that's awesome. How soon is soon? Anyone's guess. They talk about their fleet expansion, and then the rest of the presentation goes bullet by bullet on some of the things that they've achieved, the FAA milestones, the fleet expansion. So we can go into that slide by slide, but instead what I figured I would do is, and so hint, we can go down to the financials, and the financials are exactly what you would expect for a company aggressively reinvesting in its own growth. Its adjusted EBITDA is negative, not a problem. Its adjusted cash flows are negative, not a problem. I'm glazing over this specifically because we're looking at a company very early in its life cycle on a long runway, again, no pun intended, to growing into a unbelievably challenging technical market where they are going to dominate if they're the only people that can provide this hypersonic point-to-point travel, this level of private space tourism, etc. So their free cash flow, largely negative. I encourage you to not think about that as a bad thing, but as a reinvestment into this vision of the future that they are thinking about, right? So I don't want to dwell too much on their financials. I figured I'd briefly cover them just because people often ask me about the financials of each company that I cover. So let me know in the comments if there's other things you want me to cover about Virgin Galactic. But I figured I would spend a little bit of time talking about, space, the vision of the future, and then finally wrap up with the vision for the channel in the future. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything else. I have an echo. I don't know why I would have an echo. Hopefully that's resolved. So one of the things that we can talk about real quick is the future of space exploration, right? There's a lot of really great comments in the chat that I'm trying to keep up with. Cathie seems concerned as well. She's calling for a pivot, right? I think the concerns stem from this being really, really tough for the company to pull off. Not saying that they won't pull it off, but that timeline, Cathie has expectations of returns in the future. So I think she's talking about a pivot in terms of how can they remain profitable long enough to see this technical vision through, right? And she's just like, as somebody who's very familiar with all sorts of technology, she's probably like, hey, if you do this instead, this will get you the funding you need to solve this much harder problem. I think that's probably where her heart is when she makes comments like that. Not, hey, I'm expecting a 15% return year over year because I need to cumulatively double. You guys, that's my guess is that's not the heart of her comment. It's coming from a place of, hey, have you thought about this technically addressable market, this total addressable market, as a way to fund your research to get hypersonic point-to-point travel here faster? Biggest fear is actually Branson losing his life on the flight, since he wants to be the first manned flight they make. So we saw that there will be mission experts on the flights before that. So by the time they get Branson on, he won't be the first on the first manned flight. Obviously, the pilots will be there for 2 flights before him, and the mission crew 1 flight before him. He will be the first private astronaut on a Virgin Galactic space flight. He will be Virgin Galactic's first customer, which is an important distinction. So a lot of the risk is out of this scenario happening, I think, by the time Branson gets on there, because everyone else on that crew will have flown that exact scenario already, including the aircraft, obviously. So I think the runway for space exploration is incredibly long. You can imagine, if you've ever watched a sci-fi movie of any kind, humanity, multiplanetary species, Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Altered Carbon. You can go on, The Mandalorian, right? You can name IP after IP that portrays humanity as this big multiplanetary species, multicultural, lots of launch vehicles, lots of airplanes that are going orbital, then suborbital, then landing on the ground in one space flight without changing orientation in the expanse. The list goes on. And I think what we're starting to see is the first little pieces of the technologies that actually get us there. When you look at if you look at the channel trailer for ticker symbol U, I think what we're doing is we're starting to put some of those pieces together to actually make this a reality. I'm not saying it'll be a reality in our lifetime, but I am saying that a lot of the technology that people are figuring out how to make, spaceflight a repeatable process day after day, launch after launch, reusable in the case of SpaceX, reusable certainly in the case of Virgin Galactic, right? Those are instrumental pieces of the puzzle to getting a spaceport on the moon, for example, and having flights from Earth to the moon reliably like you would from New York to LA, right? So hopefully you can see that there's a lot of intermediate steps, being able to travel anywhere on Earth really fast, being able to travel between the Earth and the moon really fast, being able to travel between Earth and Mars reasonably fast, right? And then being able to send signals reliably to each of those, developing an internet that's multiplanetary, so on and so forth, are all steps in this larger puzzle of getting humanity to be a multi-planetary species. And that's why this is my favorite slide of ARK Invest in the whole report, is because they see this as well. And this is why this is a fundamentally ARK Invest first channel, is because ARK Invest is the research institution, not just the financial firm, but the research institution that is calling out humanity will be a multi-planetary species. So hopefully that gives you some insight into why Virgin Galactic is so exciting, why, again, Virgin Galactic sits inside ARKX, ARK Invest fund themed around space exploration, why it sits in ARKQ, which has space exploration as one of its major themes, all of the technologies that are converging to make orbital aerospace, including space exploration, such a big idea, mobile connectivity, 3D printing, robotics, launch costs, reusable rockets, reusable launch platforms like Virgin Galactic's, and so on. So finally, let's talk about the future of Ticker Symbol Live. Ticker Symbol Live started as an experiment. It's my test bed. It's my place where I can launch new ideas. I'm loving the word launch today. Like live streams, daily live streams focusing on one stock at a time. Initially, one of the first live streams was covering big ideas in one long live stream. One of the first live streams on here is me talking about big ideas. The day that it launched, we went through and I sat down for 3 hours and we live streamed every single slide. And we talked about how the puzzles fit together. It's still one of the most viewed live streams on this channel. And we did a great job of covering A to Z all of the disruptive technologies that are involved in that puzzle, in these big ideas that are going to exponentially grow over the next 5 years. Orbital Aerospace being one of them. Next, we decided to cover stocks on Ticker Symbol Live because Ticker Symbol U is a vision first channel. The thing that channel pumps is the future. It's not worried about individual companies. It's worried about a technical vision of what the future will look like 5 years from now. Drones will be delivering food and parcels. That's an example of that technical vision, regardless of which company is building those drones. Cars will be driving themselves. Banks will be branches in our pockets, etc., etc., etc. Advanced gene therapies will be, advanced gene editing and sequencing techniques will allow us to detect and possibly cure some cancers earlier, right? There's an example of a very technical statement that results in a very visible difference in quality of life for humanity. That's Ticker Symbol U. So Ticker Symbol Live is taking it from the other side and saying, let's look at the stocks that are doing that. However, I think it's becoming increasingly important after doing this channel for almost 5 months now to talk about those stocks as we talk about the vision. They're not two halves of the whole, they are the whole together, right? And what I mean to say by that is we should talk about Google's approach to AI, not just AI and Google separately, because Google is driving the state of the art of AI, and both of those are equally important in that sentence. How Google does AI and how other companies are learning to do AI because of Google influences how those problems are going to get solved in the future. So as we wrap up big ideas, the next things I want to cover on ticker symbol U are the stocks. I want to start talking about how Amazon Web Services is running and changing the internet for the better by democratizing a lot of services that other companies rely on today to change the future tomorrow. So we should dive deep into what Amazon Web Services is, ticker symbol AMZN or whatever. I think that's the ticker for Amazon, AMZN. And we should talk about it, and we should talk about them in the same sentence. So what I'd like to do is bring more content to ticker symbol U, more relevant technical content, more relevant financial content, because if you believe in how these problems are solved, we're already talking about the companies solving them. So you'll see this happen over and over again in this channel's history, I'm sure. Ticker symbol live and ticker symbol U are going to recombine and talk about stocks under ticker symbol U. And then the next offshoot will happen on ticker symbol live first. And you'll get early access to my thoughts on stocks, how I go about them, how I'm using data, how I'm looking at investor reports, when I do and don't care about financials, etc. And then I'll wrap that all into ticker symbol U again. And then the next thing will happen on ticker symbol live. And those two things will keep happening forever as new ideas get tested, refined, and brought back into the main channel. Because my goal is always the same. It's to invest in a 5-year vision of the future by first understanding it, and second, understanding it well enough to be able to teach it to you and myself, right? So, with that said, this will be the last stream on ticker symbol live as I incorporate all of the stuff I've learned from doing this over the last 25 episodes, over the last 5 weeks, back into ticker symbol U. And what you can expect from me is starting probably closer to the summer, 2 episodes a week on ticker symbol U, the main channel, as we talk about that 5-year vision of the future and our investment thesis in it. My name is Alex. This is ticker symbol live and now ticker symbol U. And I'm reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you. Thanks for watching.